Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Wine Women of Words. This is your co-host, Diana. Joining us today is Kristen and Alicia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and we are here to talk about your book, You've Been Served. So thank you so much for coming here to discuss it. And for those who aren't familiar with the book, could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. You've Been Served. It came out a week ago now, maybe 2 weeks, June 27th. And it's about a former chef who gets kind of fed up and, she's stressed out at her job as a chef. She's tired. She's kind of fed up with everything. And she decides to ask a magic 8-ball what she should do next. And she promises to do whatever the magic 8-ball, however the magic 8-ball answers. So she asked the magic 8-ball, should she go to law school? And it says yes. And so after, minimal prep, as much as one would do before, one goes to law school, she ends up at law school, but she's just pretty ill prepared for law school in general. And so she's just surprised at the rigor, at, professors that are more difficult than she anticipated. And so she's kind of struggling. And on top of that, she has this classmate, Silas. Her name is Simone. She has a classmate, Silas, who is really cute, really smart, kind of a gunner in class. And she's trying to figure out how to balance this person she really, really likes outside of class with the person he is in class, while also trying to figure out how to navigate this first year of law school.
And that first year of law school is a doozy.
It is a bear. It's terrible. It's not terrible. It's very difficult.
And that was one of the questions I wanted to bring up because you are currently a lawyer.
So I am a licensed attorney. I don't practice anymore, but I am a licensed attorney in California. But now I actually work at a law school where I help up and coming attorneys or soon to be attorneys figure out what they want to do with their lives.
That's so fascinating. So for myself, I'm a former paralegal.
Oh, cool.
And according to my paralegal friends, you're never former paralegal. You're still always a paralegal.
You're always a paralegal.
You're always a paralegal. It's like you're always an attorney, right?
Exactly.
Yes. My husband he graduated law school, but he's not a practicing attorney. And my father-in-law is a practicing attorney.
Oh, wow.
And I inadvertently married into a legal family. And I was with my husband while he went to law school. And I was like, there's no way in hell I would ever want to do this, but I enjoy the law. So I was like, I could be paralegals because I don't have the same worries that attorneys have.
It's kind of the perfect balance, actually.
It is. And there's so much that you can do with the legal degree in general. And I love these books that are coming out now where you have like a rom-com mixed with the legal field. And there are so many attorneys and former attorneys who are writers as well. There's many of us out here.
Yes, there's tons of us. And so I always kind of chuckle when, people say, well, how did you go from attorney to writer? And to me, it's the most natural progression. Attorneys, they tell a story. They craft a narrative, and that's what a writer does. One is obviously based on fact, and if you write fiction, it's something you make up, but you're still crafting this world, crafting this story to either convince or persuade or entertain or whatever the thing is. So to me, it's an incredibly natural progression, and it's not strange.
And I feel like people don't understand how much writing actually goes into the act of being an attorney or a paralegal.
Absolutely.
I mean, you brought up the storytelling aspect, which is so very true that I didn't even think about that part of it. But yet also there's the writing aspect where you've got to have your grammar on point. You've got to know where those periods are. I have heard of cases where they have been thrown out because the paralegal did not have the proper grammar, and they screwed over their attorney
Absolutely. And
and
so,
the client
yeah, isn't that
and the
lovely?
client.
I that's part of why I went to law school, actually. I've always loved writing, and I thought, well,
Mhm,
right, lawyers do a lot of writing,
mhm,
and lawyers do a lot of writing. That was most of my job when I practiced, write.
mhm,
But it's a little bit different than writing writing books or writing content. But it's so funny you mentioned the grammar, because I tell my students all the time, when I was in law school, I had a professor who was an amazing professor. She was probably my favorite professor throughout law school, but she was tough. And she would start grading our papers after she had caught any grammar errors.
mhm.
And so if you had a big chunk, a good number of grammar errors, you might be starting at an 80, and then she grades the content. And so I tell my students, I'm like, you're lucky if you don't have a if you have a professor that doesn't do that. You're already in a good place. But it's the reality of the legal practice. Some judges
Mhm,
are just that tough.
mhm. Oh, 100%. And it was, I know the case in point, there was an eviction, and they made a grammar error, and that almost completely tanked the whole thing. And I did estate planning. It was, yeah. The- Since you were like, yeah, estate planning too. You know the real world that I lived in, where you had to have it on point, and the names. I swear to God, I hate the name Jeffrey now and forever.
So
I'm sorry.
you get it. And so my character didn't know any of this. She just
Mhm,
didn't have a point of reference. Simone just
mhm,
didn't realize this is what law school is going to look like.
mhm.
And so she was shocked when she got there, to say the least.
Yeah, my father-in-law didn't even intend to go to law school. My husband was going through his first year, and my father-in-law was giving him a hard time. And my husband's response was, "Well, if you think this is so easy, why don't you go?" And so his dad did. And his dad, after the first year, was like, "Son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did this to you."
That's hilarious.
But like, you don't know until you're in the midst of it.
Right. And you really don't. And you know, it's one of those things that you can tell someone what your first year of law school is like,
Mhm,
but until you've lived it, it's a really hard thing to get someone to understand.
mhm,
It's hard. It's hard in a way that a lot of other things aren't. You're learning a
mhm,
new language, you're learning a new way to think, how to read, a new way to read, a new way to speak to people.
mhm.
And so something about that first year just sort of really changes a lot for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that we're talking about this, going from the law to writing, because also you had just doing some light stalking, I swear, just light stalking on your on your socials. This was not the first career that you had before writing a book.
No, I've done a little bit of everything. And I'm a firm believer in, keep trying till you find what you like, which I think is why I also enjoy writing. You can just kind of delve into these different little worlds. But I was an attorney. I guess I still am an attorney, but I was a practicing attorney. I was a real estate agent. I've been in sales. I was a recruiter. Um, Briefly in college, I was a valet in Malibu, a lifeguard. I've done all kinds of things between my law firm job and going into, I think, recruiting. Or right after I left my law firm job, I tutored autistic kids and dyslexic kids, which was one of my more favorite jobs. It was really fun in reading, so that makes sense. Yeah, I've done a little bit of everything.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up is there are so many people out there who feel that, for starters, you have to have a degree in English, or an MFA in English, or something else within the arts to be able to have a published book. And that's really not the case.
I agree. It's really not. I I think one of the most important things about being a writer is being a reader. Read a lot and just reader and an observer, watching people, watching the world. But yeah, you don't have to have the English degree. You don't have to have the MFA. At least I don't think so. And I don't. So there you go. I mean, I guess my background is sort of in writing in a sense because I was an attorney, but I don't think that's at all necessary. I think it's just,
I mean, there's so many people that are out there who go from careers that are, engineers. I actually think Vanessa Riley was an engineer. Her book is right over here. So I looked at it. I was like, oh yeah, she was an engineer before she was a writer.
Yeah, she's in STEM. She might still be, in fact, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many that are out there who do so many different things. And there's no one way to be a writer, and there's no one way to get to the ultimate goals of getting a book out, whether it's indie or, mainstream publishing.
Exactly. I mean, I think that especially nowadays, there's no one way to become a writer, and there's no one way to get your book published, which I think is beautiful. You can go to a small press, you can go to, traditional publishing, you can do self-publishing. And I think that's a great thing. It gives more people opportunities to get their work out there. And conversely, it gives readers the opportunity to read something that otherwise they may not be able to, they may not get the exposure to.
And it's one of the things that has always kind of stuck with me is, and then people who listen, you've known this, I think I've rallied on this point many times. I'm not going to do it again. The whole advice of write what you know is not specific to writing per se. Like, okay, write what you know. If you want to write science fiction, you've got to be able to be a engineer or a computer person. Versus writing what you know is about writing about people. You have to be able to know people. You have to be able to know characters, along with the story plot and everything else. So writing what you know means you have to be out there and have some world experience and experience some of these other things, and not necessarily be, in that whole writing world.
Exactly. Write what you know, I guess, is, I don't know, you don't have to be your characters. You shouldn't be your characters necessarily. If that's the case, that'd be kind of boring, right? Like, it would just be lots of versions of you in a book. And like, I don't want to read lots of versions of myself. But, I think in terms of write what you know, like you said, go experience the world. And that doesn't have to be traveling. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It could be sitting in a coffee shop and watching two people have a conversation, like not in a creepy way, but just, or maybe in a creepy way, I don't know. But, just observing the world around you. And so, what you observe is what you know. It doesn't have to be what you've lived. It can just be what you've seen, or it can be what you've experienced. But I fully agree with you. That's what makes writing and reading interesting. Especially writing, you want to write different things. It's fun researching different careers and, different personality traits, or thinking about different personality traits, or, all those different things. I'm working on book 2 right now, and one of my characters is really into astrology. I'm not that into astrology. I think it's cool, but I'm not like deep into it. So I've been looking into astrology and trying to figure out more about that. And it's been fun.
And it's always fun. I mean, today I was researching about goats. Like, how many times are you supposed to milk a goat in a day? And it's surprising how often you're supposed to milk a goat in a day.
Really? Well, how often are you supposed to milk?
Twice a day.
Yeah. Well, I guess I never really thought about how many times to milk a goat, but
and you have to do it within 12 hours.
Oh.
So, and it has to be like right after the kid has been weaned. Then you do the milking. And so if you have multiple goats, imagine how much time this can take.
Yeah, that could really be your day, milking goats. And
yes.
For some people it is. And that's awesome.
It is awesome for them. But then also realistically, I have a character who has some goats. How often is she milking that goat? And how many goats is she going to have?
Right. Like, she could have 20 goats, but she's doing a lot of milking if she has 20 goats.
A lot of milking, and she's the only one who has this major interest in the goats and the family. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to work with that? And these are those little things that you get to research and be an expert in within 24 hours.
Exactly. And it's so fun because think about the wealth of knowledge you have. It's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, the astrology stuff is going to be fun as well.
I'm
I'm sure.
actually really excited about it. And it's incongruent with the character, which is what I'm really excited about. Like she's
Mhm,
not someone you would think would be that, but for whatever that means, into
mhm,
astrology. But she is. And I like that.
mhm.
The two aren't, she's not like your stereotypical, if you will, person who's into astrology for whatever that's worth. But yeah, I don't know. So I'm
Yeah. I
excited
mean,
myself.
there's always something to the whole like, what's your sign? Because it also relates to your personalities in this weird way. I'm very much a Libra in every sense of the word.
Say I'm very much a Scorpio in every sense of the word.
So one of the other things to switch gears just slightly is I want to talk about Black joy for a
Yeah.
moment and how important it is to have books out there, especially in the climate that we're in, that experiences Black joy. And I'm loving so many of these rom-coms written by Black authors and have these Black characters prominently that are just fun to read and enjoyable.
Yeah, I really wanted to write something that was just fun.
Mhm.
I mean, there wasn't a whole lot. Um, I like rom-coms. They make me happy. I enjoy them. But specifically, I did want to show Black characters who were just, living their lives, experiencing love and some pain, but not necessarily trauma. But they're happy. They're enjoying their lives, and I think that's a really um, nice thing to bring into the literary world,
Mhm.
especially when things are so hard. Often, it's nice to have a little bit of an escape. And so often we see Black characters who are experiencing trauma, which that's part of reality also. But it's nice to address or have these characters that can just be that can just be. I mean, they're living their lives, they're falling in love, they have these great friendships. They, have minor issues with, like a professor or something like that, but mostly they're just living their lives and enjoying it. And I like that.
Mhm. And as much as some of the other stories may be of importance, and I'm thinking like even like within historical fiction, there are so many stories about slavery involving slavery, but there's so much more to the experience and to the history as well. Like as an Italian, I always say there's more to us than mafia meatballs. And and for the Black experience, there's so much more to your history than slavery, as much as it is a big part of the history. And there's no taking away from that, but there are so many other elements that we have a tendency to forget. Sorry, I'm a historical fiction author, and that's my favorite genre. So I'm always going to go back to historical fiction.
No, I mean, that's true though. I mean, there's so much more to the Black experience than trauma. Trauma is part of the Black experience, but trauma is part of lots of experiences. But it's not the only thing that happens. We experience love and joy and all the things that everybody else does. It's not just this trauma based experience. And that is not in any way to take away from um, traumatic, trauma.
Mhm, mhm,
That's an important thing to write about, and it's an important thing for people to read about and to know about, but it's not the only thing. And I think
mhm,
that things sort of in publishing, because publishing, a lot of times, a lot of what we see is Black trauma. We see Black trauma, trauma of being an LGBTQ person, being an Asian person, being a person of color,
mhm,
and all these experiences don't have to be trauma based.
mhm,
There is trauma, but that is not the only thing involved in
mhm.
these experiences.
Yes, absolutely. It's always a, it's an important topic to discuss, but sometimes it also feels like I don't know how to put it, but it's still like to talk about the joy, be able to talk about joy and have it,
Exactly.
be able to talk about it wholeheartedly and be like, yes, there is joy, and it's so wonderful to be able to talk about that along with, so much of the history and historical experience.
Right. And no experience is all one thing.
Yes. Mhm.
And so I think that's just a really important thing. So I wanted to write a book with Black characters. And also just think that's really important in general.
Yeah.
Uh, and Black characters that were just, they were successful. They are living their lives. Sure, Simone is having this big life change, and it is big for her, but it's not this big traumatic experience for her. And it doesn't have to do necessarily with her race. This is something that could happen to anyone. Um, and so I think that was kind of important for me to portray. She's just living.
Mhm. Yeah, experience having that just experience for the life and being a fiction reader. There are studies that show that fiction readers are more empathetic in general as a whole towards the world itself. And I think I like to say, decolonizing our bookshelves, reading everything from the back of shampoo bottles to the classics. We've got to read everything as both readers and writers. And that really gives so many readers have this wonderful perspective on the world that are like, okay, you love books too. All right, well, come in, let's be friends and let's just
Exactly.
share books.
Exactly. And I love that. That's like one of the greatest things about reading. You can
Mhm.
experience lots of different worlds and people and places through books. And I think books just kind of they bring people together. Um,
Yes.
what a great thing to talk about. What's better than talking about books? I love talking about books.
Exactly. And talking about a book where I was like, all right, I'm going to use a magic 8 ball so that I can determine whether or not I should go to law school, which I think.
And I mean, it's a fun premise. I thought, because oh, maybe somebody would decide to go to law school with a magic 8 ball, but people go do all kinds of things for all kinds of reasons.
Yes. And the magic 8 ball has determined so many fates. What-
I think it's so important. You gotta use the magic 8 ball.
Yeah, I mean, did you hear that they're going to be doing a magic 8 ball movie?
No, that's awesome.
Yes, it's going to be a horror movie, but it's
Gorgeous.
using the magic 8 ball. And I'm like,
Oh,
you
I
know
love
what?
that.
I can see that. I'm here for
Me too. I am so here for it. I love that.
it.
I'm not that into horror movies just because, the gore,
Same.
but
Yeah.
I'll totally watch it.
I mean, is it going to be like Chucky where you have a demon possessing the magic 8 ball?
Whereas like the magic 8 ball possessed. Oh.
Ooh.
Or is it like what's that movie? I can't even think of the name. Was it Final Destination? But like
Oh,
the
yeah.
magic 8 ball kind of like
Yeah.
determines what yeah, I don't know.
Oh,
I'm
I feel like
fascinated.
we're like shopping our own book right here.
I know. Is this the next book? Is this going to be a sequel to this Magic 8 Ball movie?
I am, yes. Is it going to be like something like out of a haunted mansion where you have the woman in like the 8 ball itself, like it's like a scrying thing? No.
Oh, like Aladdin meets Magic 8 Ball. Like maybe she's a genie and she pops out the 8 ball.
Yeah.
So and that's the beauty of writing. It's just, there's so many ways things can go. I love it.
Yes,
What are
and
you
then you
reading?
get two people from the legal field. When we were talking about crafting stories, this is what we were talking about.
Exactly.
Except there is no murder and no fraud. And
And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
yes. Also, we have two people who apparently have I saw in your thing that you've got ADD,
Yes.
as do I. So we have two people who have ADD who are just coming together like, okay, we're just going on a tangent and we're just going to talk about this magic 8 ball and this woman who just pops out of it.
And that's a creativity. That's why I love, like, the ADHD brain is, it can be tough sometimes, but it's also creative and interesting and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, as just happened. I love it.
Yes, yes, and This was something that I want to talk about with it because I think I've talked about a little bit here before on it, because I'm one of those people. I guess I'm part of I don't know if it's necessarily the silent girls or the lost girls who in the 80s weren't diagnosed with ADD because it did not exist in that day for girls. It was only boys.
Yep.
I was just that little kid who was just like, I was like, hey, just don't give her sugar.
Yep. I was the little girl in class, like daydreaming, zoned out in the back, kind of doing my own thing. I'm the adult woman daydreaming, so just gotta do my own thing. And so, I got diagnosed later, kind of as a teenager. I was probably in my junior year of high school. Then it just sort of stayed there. Like, it didn't do anything. I didn't medicate. I didn't do anything. But by then, I'd come up with so many coping mechanisms to get through school, that I, kind of figured out how to make having to live in this world that wasn't necessarily made for someone that has a brain that works like mine. So I just had to figure out how to make it work. And there's a hereditary, a genetic aspect. My dad has ADHD also. And so, we talk about this a lot. It's like, yeah, we just figured out how to kind of make it work for ourselves. Like for me, at my book launch a few days ago, someone asked me how long I can sit down and write. And I kind of had to chuckle. It's like, well, not that long, really. I mean, when I have my medication, maybe an hour or two. When I don't, not an hour or two.
Yeah, I'm not on medication, and like you, it's a matter of the coping mechanisms that you've just learned to deal with. And for me, it's a matter of writing a book is a hyperfixation for me, which that's totally like the hyperfixation aspect of it. I was like, oh, that's where it comes from. Because when I was writing my first book, my husband was like, I've never seen you focus on something as much as you do when you're writing. And I was like, yeah, I wonder why that is. And it's because of the ADD. I can actually hyperfixate on my creativity on this world that I'm building from my head.
That's awesome. I love, as much as I love writing, I don't get hyperfixated on writing, but I do with reading. So if I start to read a book, I'm zoned in there, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad. It's not a great thing at night when I'm laying in bed and it's been like 4 hours and I need to go to sleep. But it does allow me to read a lot, which is a good thing. But I kind of wish I hyperfixated on my writing. So we'll see how book 2 goes.
We'll see. Yeah, you never know. I mean, I also had the pandemic going for me for my second book. So that made hyperfixation and like writing the second book much easier for me. The third book was a whole different story.
Yeah.
But
well, as you say that though, I finished You've Been Served right after I had my daughter, which was during the pandemic. So maybe though, because I finished it like in the middle of the night, sitting like hanging out with my 2-month-old kid, and I'd been writing for a really long time at that point, like for a few hours. So maybe it just depends. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean that can make sense with it. And for now, my curiosity for you is I'm a fast reader. Are you also a fast reader?
I am a fast reader.
Interesting. I wonder if there is a interesting aspect to that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm a fast reader, and I am also a really fast writer.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. And so, maybe, I don't know, maybe our brains work a little faster.
Maybe. I feel like there needs to be a study, if anybody's listening out there who does like other like quantitative studies that are much better at this than we are. Please do that. We would be happy to do any questionnaire that you need. I'm just volunteering, Kristen, here, but like, yeah, you're going to join in with us.
Oh no, I'm in there with you.
Welcome to being on this podcast.
I love it.
Well, then this also brings up one of the questions that Michelle and I have is that we ask, because we kind of did this like little survey that we had with all of our authors. So I'm really interested in your take on this. So Michelle likes to have everything nice and neat and orderly in her world. Yeah, you and I, we already know what the answer is for that. But when it comes to her writing, it's just whatever flows that day. Meanwhile, as your smile showed, we're ADD people. We have chaos in our home and organized chaos at best.
Yep.
But when it comes to my writing, because I write historical fiction, I have to be very detailed orientated. I have to have this outline and this roadmap for myself to be able to write. So I'm wondering, do you do that too? Are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
So it's funny you should say that. I am very naturally a pantser. Throw things to the wall and see what sticks. But in working on my second book, I ended up having to outline, and I kind of like it. It's really hard for me to just like do that and organize those thoughts and all those things, but I like it. And so I ended up getting Plotter, the software, and I'm trying to use it.
Mm.
And I think it's going to be good. I hope. But naturally, I'm a total pantser. But the flip side of that is because I've been to law school, I had to learn to become much more detail oriented. And as a lawyer, you have to be so detail oriented. So am I detail oriented normally? Absolutely not. I'm chaotic most of the time. But because it's something that I had to learn. And so now I'm thinking maybe I'll write even faster if I can maybe outline first. It's not as much, the process isn't as much fun for me that way, but it's still, I think it's going to work.
Yeah. And I mean, when you plot, they're like guidelines. It's very pirate-esque. They're more like guidelines where you have that place, so you go off and you do your thing, but you come back and you have this point that you can just really, rely on. Like this character who has the goats in this book that I'm working on, she was not a part of the plot at all. And so this, like, she came in, I was like, okay, like historically I should have this brother be married by this point. All right, I'm gonna put her in here. And so she ends up like really helping my plot. And it's like, oh, I like this. And it fits right in with what I already had painted out.
And because you already knew what you had, like, knew where it was going. So that's why thinking like plotting and outlining I think it's gonna work for me.
Yes, I'm a big proponent on plotting, especially for people like us where it doesn't have to be strict, because I'm not the kind of person that has like everything strict organizing. Everything, I have organized piles, I have organized bins. That is the best I can do. and I'm waiting for approval for to be a foster parent. And so I'm getting ready to be a kid, to bring a kid in. And I'm like, okay, they're going to have organized bins too. That's just the way we're gonna work.
Yeah, that's ideal.
I know, ideal. Having a kid is going to totally change all of that, but got to have the bins. At least it looks kind of.
The bins do help. I finally got bins. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and our house is 95% of the time organized chaos or just chaos. But we did get the bins, and they are very helpful. They were supposed to be organized a little bit better. I organized them at some point. Now they're just bins, but there's stuff in them, and I feel like that's the best I can do right now.
And that really truly helps, just having the organization of the bins that I can just throw them in there, and I have them. It's not like I have a bin for. I'm just looking at my bins right now. I have bins for yarn. I have multiple bins for yarn because you start projects and then you just don't finish them.
Of course.
That's what I do. And then I've got a bin for all my stationery. I have a bin for the finished stuff. It's the bin model. It's really helpful. That's my coping mechanism.
That's brilliant. You're speaking my language. I have my bins from my knitting and from my drawing and For the sewing, I never really kind of got around to, but the bins do help. Now, eventually, all my stuff ends up in just the one bin,
Mhm.
but at least it's all my, unfinished projects in one place rather than all
Yes.
over the house. So I take the wins where they come.
Yes, and I'm sure our partners are like, all right, they're not all over the house.
Exactly.
My poor husband wound up with this neurodivergent wild wife, and it's like, oh yeah, the cute one. This is what happens when yeah, she's not so cute. She's really weird.
I mean, I think it's, my husband, same thing. It's like, oh, she's quirky, it's cute. It's like, okay. It's cute today, but 12 years later, but I think he still thinks it's, adorable-ish, if not adorable.
Depends on what day of the week it is.
Exactly. It depends on the day, how chaotic things have gotten, but it works.
I tell my husband I keep him on his toes. I make his life interesting because he would be completely bored without me.
I tell my husband that all the time.
Yes.
You would be so bored. Your life would be like, normal and, straightforward.
Mhm.
What's the fun in that?
Exactly. You just go to work and you come home and you play with your Legos and that would be it. How boring is that?
But now you don't know what you might come home to.
Exactly.
When we were dating, I remember I called my husband. I was like, come outside and see what I've got. Because my boyfriend, my husband now. And I had 2 puppies. Like, guess what we're doing this weekend? Cute. They were adorable.
Oh,
Lots of puppies. And what a fun surprise to come home to. You can't beat that.
yeah, exactly. We make life interesting.
Exactly. I'm glad we're on the same page here.
Well, we are definitely at our half hour. So for those of you who have not picked up your copy of You've Been Served, please check our show notes. We do have a link to our bookshop at bookshop.org. As always, bookshop.org supports all of the wonderful authors who take the time to join us here on the podcast. It supports independent bookstores, and most importantly, it supports this podcast. Yay. So be sure to go to the show notes and pick up your copy of You've Been Served. And Kristen, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.